But even before that, I think it's important that people know something about you and about who you are, because clearly you are the source of this credential. And so anything you can share about who you are would be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, my history, goes back a fair way, and long before there were any. I mean, where even behaviour analysis was even, kind of acknowledged as a independent field of study, and the notion. I mean, it was quite interesting because I mean, I used to have business cards that I'd put in a list. Both behavior analysis, but also called myself a behavior analyst in the very early days, and it was before that term really even existed, quite honestly, because of course behavior analysis has always traditionally been a discipline sort of under the psychology umbrella, and as I studied in the early days medicine and what have you, then it was very apparent to me that my interests lay in why people do what they do. And I'm somewhat distressed to report all these years later that the more I know about human behavior, the less I know about human behavior. My PhD thesis was in complex and challenging behaviors in individuals with intellectual disabilities, particularly, and out of that kind of also grew my focus on autism spectrum disorder, because I found that from a neurological perspective so fascinating. So the two have kind of come together for me as a career, and to kind of introduce, I guess, the topic for the day. I moved to the United States here about 12, 13 years ago. My residency, I think, is actually only 10 years old. But I was really quite curious about what was then, a continuing or developing credential, the BCDA, Board Certified Behaviour Analyst, put out by the BACB, and I was curious because outside of the United States at that time, the credential was not really known, or if it was known, it wasn't mandated anywhere. So no one sort of had a motivation to become to get the credential. But what fascinated me most was the notion that, and I couldn't think of another industry where this was the case, is that there was really only one option in this particular industry or this sector. I can't think of another one where there's just a single option for people wanting to become credentialed and advance their career. So over the years, I think, as I continued to niggle away at my brain, I thought that perhaps there was an opportunity to help advance the sector and start building, not an alternative's not the right word. I'm not sure what the word is, but what a better one, alternative to the single credential that was available at the time. At that point, I kind of committed to start down that track about 5, 6, well, it must be 7 years ago now. And hence it started an organization called the Qualified Applied Behaviour Analysis Credentialing Board, QABA. And whilst I'm no longer formally involved with that organization anymore, I'm very pleased and proud to have been part of establishing at least the beginnings of an alternative that would help drive quality and innovation in the sector.
There's this old saying that every village needs to have 2 synagogues so that you can always say that you go to the other one.
When I first started making noises about what was then not even called the QABA, I hadn't got that far yet. I was very quickly told by others in the sector that, well, what's the point? There's no need. We've already got something. And and that really fascinated me, to be honest, that because it was almost like a fait accompli. You know, it was like, oh, that's all we need now, so let's just get on with it. And you know, any industry, whether you're talking about a product that that you're trying to sell, or whether you're talking about something that helps to establish and maintain and grow improvements in quality and so on. The notion that there wouldn't be potential consequences isn't the right word either, but potential impact by only having a single credentialing agency, I think for me is very apparent. But it was met with, when I first was making noises about it, it was met with quite some, well, in some cases, aggression almost. It was how dare you do this? and which doesn't frighten me away, luckily, because we were able to push through.
Really, the motivation behind licensure is essentially financial, which is to say, if you're licensed, then you can be covered by insurance more easily, and therefore you'll have people who can pay your bills. And I'm assuming that's the main motivation for licensure, even though, insurance companies have been forced to pay for just a certificate level. Anyway, I'm just curious about your thoughts.
Yeah, what licensure achieves is accountability, and out of accountability, hopefully also comes safe practice and a focus on do no harm, basically, and so in that sense, I really have no issue with licensing and what have you. But I think if I have a concern, it is ensuring that any credentialing that licensing is requiring is robust and really establishes a platform upon which continued development and research and quality can be built, because it is a journey. You don't create quality on day one. It's not. It just it grows out of innovation and people just having discussions like this and thinking about things and what have you. So I kind of see a place for both. And it is a uniquely, and excuse my sort of foreign take on it, it is a fairly uniquely American concept. And a lot of that has been driven because it is an insurance-based health system, whereby the people who are paying for the services have certain requirements. And when I first came, I really struggled with that, because I come from a more sort of socialized healthcare background, but over the years, although I still have some concerns, over the years, I can see, if properly managed, it could help improve and drive that innovation and quality that I've been referring to. But it really, but the problem is it's still competitive, isn't it? And all the time, and there's nothing wrong with a bit of competition, but it also means that it's hard for us to get people together and have a core, have discussion around what we do as an industry rather than what we do for our company that's paying for these services, for our company, these places, and so on. So where's that common forum, that can be, where we can have those common discussions in the best interest of the people who use the services, because they're almost forgotten sometimes. It becomes about the system, it becomes about us and who connects, and who, so for me, I come from and also wholeheartedly endorse a more values-based approach to these things, and that way I think we're at less risk of losing sight of the individual at the end of that line receiving services.
Certification and licensure is very complicated. I think there are clear distinctions.
Yeah. And even detail, it distresses me when, to this day, when I have conversations. I've just got back from Dublin in Ireland from the ABAI conference, and I had lots of conversations with people passing by and what have you, and the lack of true understanding of what credentialing actually is, is concerning, to be honest. Even within our industry, the difference between you've talked about certifications, there and what have you. There are different kinds of or levels of certification. There's a certificate program where you actually do coursework, an exam, and awarded a certificate for having completed that successfully. Then there is personnel certifications, which are exams that you go away, do approved coursework and get supervision and what have you, and prepare yourself to sit for the final exam, which is what the QABA does, and the BCBA. Sorry, the BACB. Need to change that acronym. Yeah. Anyway, so the personnel certification is just an exam to say, yes, I've gone away and I've gathered some knowledge and somebody's watched me do some stuff, and now I think I'm ready to sit for the exam. And then you pass it, and you are then now apparently qualified to go and practice. And somewhat controversially, Ira, I believe that when you gain a certification or when you become credentialed, it's a bit like a driver's license. It doesn't mean you're an expert now. What it means is that you now have the ability to go out and work in the real world, gain experience, and continue to develop as a behavior analyst, or whatever it is. But in this case, behavior analyst. Now, that's not to say that some people come with years and years of experience and they're just formalizing it now because there is a credential that's available. I mean, I understand that there are different people entering it from different levels of experience and so on. But what we've had is this blip of newly credentialed practitioners who see themselves, and others perceive them as being the expert. And what all the credential has really, the only purpose that a credential exists, and people might be surprised at this, is to establish a minimally qualified individual, a basis on which you can have an expectation that they are at least at this level. The shining lights and the really competent practitioners are ones that then continue to evolve and develop and practice and what have you, and gather that experience. So credentialing by definition is to establish a minimally qualified individual, to say that they've demonstrated they have at least this amount of knowledge. Right now, what we're at risk of, I think, is, and I've experienced some of this firsthand, is that because people are credentialed, there is far too high a expectation put on them if they when they first become so, because I believe that's when you start learning. With the caveat that there are people who come with years and years of experience as well. But when I'm faced with someone, as I was very recently, within the last few weeks, who was a newly qualified behavior analyst or newly credentialed behavior analyst, who told me that she had never, identify the gender, but had never completed a full assessment, a full functional behavior assessment. And I was like, what are you talking about? How could you get through the process without having completed a full, given that that's the basis of everything you subsequently do? So now what we have is a concern that is the supervisory component of gaining a credential and what have you robust enough. If you were to ask me about potential solutions, one of the things that I would really like to see evolve is where I come from, we'd call it a form of residency. I think in the United States, it's probably more of an internship if it was, a doctor completing their degree and what have you, where there is very clearly operationally defined criteria by which in the first, 6 months, 12 months, whatever it needs to be, the is continued to be supervised and and having their work reviewed and what have you, so that we can just be sure that that translation from knowledge to practice is being effective. The other thing that I have a concern about is outside of the United States, now that the BACB Behavior Analyst Certification Board is essentially pulling out of everywhere but North America, Mexico and what have you, is that it's a little bit Wild Westish out there, where people are becoming certified or credentialed as a, let's say, a registered behavior technician or a applied behavior analyst, analysis technician, or ABAT, there's BCAT, there's now, there's 4 credentials now at that entry level. But what's happening without oversight is in some countries that we're working in, and we won't go into which countries they are, but that people are becoming a behavior technician, getting a credential, and actually going out and independently practicing.
Right.
And now the handbook's very clear in the QABA. I can vouch for that because I wrote it. I don't know, it may have changed. I'm sure it's changed by now, but it's very clear that the ethics code for a behavior technician is that you cannot practice independently. Right. You are not an independent practitioner. I see this all as part of the process, the journey. I'm sure if we look at any kind of new and emerging and evolving kind of structure for credentialing and certain types of clinical practice and everything like that, you bump into something and you think, oh no, we've got to find a solution to that, but it's being responsive to those things and not just accepting or ignoring them. So that's kind of where I come from. I think now that we have a couple of good alternatives for credentialing and behavior analysis, now what we need to do is really focus on the quality and the translation of the knowledge that having achieved that credential says I have, that it is translatable into that into healthy, safe practice.
When we talked a little while ago about sort of the origins of the QABA in your mind, the thing that stood out the most was simply to have an alternative. That's the point that you stressed most. And I think I can't help but wonder, and I assume that others do as well, when you began the QABA, did you see it in any way? Did you differentiate it in any way from the BACB, which there may have been?
And I was always very curious as to what part technology could play in what it is that we do. With my focus on what I call workforce development, because at the end of the day, you or me or someone equally experienced writes a behavior intervention plan that we think is awesome, and we hold it up with pride and we say, geez, look how good I am, and then we hand it over to who's actually down there on the day doing the work, and it's only as good as that person. Doesn't matter how brilliant my writing is, it's only as good as that person. And to this day, what we have is a workforce that's doing 80% of the work in terms of delivering these programs, who are the least paid, the least least supported often, and I think that's a problem. And the reason it's a problem is because it doesn't establish a really attractive career path for people. They just see it as quite literally, and this as well as I do, at least I'm guessing you do, people that
that come into these jobs at behavior technician level are often sort of saying, should I do this or should I go and work at a fast food joint? Like it's kind of, and so, what the sector has failed to do, in my view, is build a really sound foundation upon, from which an individual can launch a career path. So what we have are people who are there just doing a job. Not everyone, don't get me wrong. God, we've got some brilliant behavior technicians, but and I would love to pay them double what they get, but you just can't do it because that's not how the reimbursement insurance system is kind of structured. But and what organizations do is get really good at recruitment because there's such a high turnover. And I mean, the average in the United States and here in California is somewhere around the 50% mark. It rivals the fast food industry. And for every individual that you lose, even at behavior technician level, by the time you factor in all of the variables, such as just the effort to replace them and all that entails, also any lost revenue you have because that person's now left and now you can't get someone back in there for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever it is, and so there's loss, is between $3,000 and $5,000. Right. Somewhere between $3,000 and $5,000, and sometimes some of the larger organizations around the country are recruiting, for replacement, certainly in the tens and in some cases in the hundreds of people a month. So having good, meaningful credentials where people are qualified, but also have knowledge and that's translated into good practice and everything like that, and helps establish a career path and a commitment to that career path, just makes good business sense, if nothing else.
Which makes me think that the implication is that your intention in creating the QABA was to do that, which was to create a clear path, where at the time, I believe the BACB did not have, for example, the ABT. They did not have a clear path. They just had their mid-tier, their supervisor.
BCABA and the BCBA and the BCBAD. Let me respond to that. I mean, and because this is an evidence-based response. Because people don't always believe it. I remember we were giving a talk or introducing the QABA before we were even had full accreditation and what have you for the ABAT credential, the Applied Behavior Analysis Technician. And I can't remember. I think it might have been Chicago or somewhere like that. And there was a lot of, we were well attended because people had something to say, and mostly what they had to say was, who do you think you are coming in and stepping all over this when we just don't need an, why do you think there needs to be an alternative? And we were talking about the ABAT, the entry behavior technician, and in a somewhat confused manner. Oh, this, by the way, this was just as the ACB's registered behavior technician credential was being promoted. And I said, well, in actual fact, the question should be sent to the BACB because we had the ABAT credential 2 years before the RBT even existed.
Right. That's right. That's how I understand.
Yeah. Now, of course, coming out of nowhere, it's going to take a lot longer to get traction and a lot and recognition and understanding and what have you. But what was curious when I provided that information was that it was met more with confusion than any real retort. It was like, what are you talking about? 2 years ago, and and I mean that's just a matter of record, so and that's easy to evidence. But and again, I see the fact that the BACB coming out with the RBT as an extraordinarily helpful step forward. And I see the QABA with the ABAT extraordinarily helpful step forward. As much as anything, because now what we have is a process, and whether it's a conscious process or not by the QABA or BACB to improve quality as to just be better than them, whether it's that or not, will, over time, drive innovation and quality. As simple as that. And you know, that's not always easy to quantify, is it? Because you know, it's like buying into a piece of software, and you think, oh, should I have this one or this one or this one? And they all kind of do the same thing. And oh, well, this one does this, but it doesn't do that, and that one does that, but it doesn't do this, and you know, but they all eventually do what everyone else is doing. You know, so it's always improving, it's always driving forward, and I have no reason to think that by having two credentialing bodies and alternative credentials, no reason to think why that process wouldn't be the same.
What expertise is required of becoming a certified behavior analyst? Knowing anything about autism or having any experience with autistic kids was never part of the curriculum until fairly recently. And
yeah, correct. And our focus was very much on behavior analysis within the within the context of autism. Now, you know, I this is a debate that we can have another time with others who have an opinion, but you know, my view is that if the world operated in behavior analysis based on what we do for individuals diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, we'd probably be doing a better job of those who aren't diagnosed from a behavior analysis point of view. I personally believe clinically that there is, you know, the application of ABA with the support of for individuals diagnosed with ASD is quite specific, and somewhat controversially, the QABA credentials as I envisaged them and initially started to develop, because you know, I can't comment on subsequent movement. I have no opinion, I really don't, because I think from what I've seen that it's been maintained, and that is that most of what I'm supportive of is non-aversive, least restrictive type practices, and that even the exams that I was involved in developing and what have you were very much focused on proactive versus reactive type approaches to behavior support, now here's why I think that it's different to the BACB, because I have no criticism of the BACB with regard to that philosophy. They may not even disagree now, I don't know, but because the BACB was not established specifically for people diagnosed with autism, or for that matter, even people, because you know, the fact is, you as a behavior analyst, you may train dogs or horses, or you know, I mean, you know, so it was to, you know, in my view, quite correctly, when Jerry Shook, you know, the founder of the BACB, you know, who prior to his passing away, I had several conversations and good lunches with, and you know, and he was quite clear that and helped me to understand that no, behavior analysis is not just about people. This is about principles. It's about behavioral principles that we all need to learn and understand in order to apply it to whoever or whatever we're working with. And I thought that was a really healthy outlook. Now, the challenge we have when we start focusing on just in autism or, you know, the people world, is that you know, I'm a great believer in social validity, and you know, and I see practices all the time, programs that people don't even understand are punitive. You know, I'm talking about some very experienced people that don't understand that they're punitive, and you know, and so that non-aversive kind of philosophy and proactive practice and what have you is very much the basis upon which I developed the QABA.
Eventually, the BACB did come around, and now
Right.
makes it part of their. So we do see this sort of process that you were discussing earlier of coming together to kind of create
And advancement and innovation, and you know, now I don't know whether that's thanks to the QABA or anything else. I have no idea, but the point is, here, that's a good example of exactly what I'm referring to. You know,
I believe, at least I heard a rumor or have a vague memory that some of your training early on as a behavior analyst kind of came out of that positive behavior support.
It did, but not because, because it suited my character. That I don't, it wasn't even initially, I mean, because I have a strong belief in social validity and in social justice. It could be argued that that's why I kind of went down that track, but it really was not that at all. It was very simply the data. It was doing things, just putting it in simple terms, doing things one way and testing it, and doing things another way and testing it, and looking at results both initially and over time. And
Right.
And purely for practical purposes, it was very apparent to me very quickly as a younger practitioner that there's no question that we could control people, but that we would have to be in their lives doing that for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
And in my view, it is our job to exit people's lives to whatever degree we can, and to build self-reliance and independence to whatever level the individual is able to achieve, and that is good for both the person, which has to be the focus, the central figure, which is, because everything we do, we try and do in a person-centered way. Because if we can, minimize the amount of intervention, if we can, have it as or exit at some point, or train up families to be able to, understand the principles and apply them on an ongoing and consistent basis. All of that is good for the person, but it's also good for the sector. It's good for economies. It's good for health systems overall. I mean, I think there are, even if you don't agree clinically with what I'm saying, there are other good reasons for it. You can spend decades preparing to get something perfect and launch it on day one, only to find at the end of the first day you're going, oh, gee, I didn't think of that. And so, there's making sure that it's fundamentally meets a particular standard, and then continue to change, to continue to evolve, continue to drive quality. And you do that based on information, and you only get information based on being out there doing, getting stuck into it. But you must be responsive to it. When you identify something that is a potential improvement in terms of outcomes for the end user, the person at the end getting these services, then you cannot ignore it. You must find solutions, and the solutions shouldn't be competitive. They shouldn't be, oh, let's keep that to ourselves because that will give us an edge over those people or whatever. It should be an industry driven and for the good of the sector sort of process.